For the past several weeks, a US military strike on Iran appeared increasingly likely. Protests were spreading. The regime was under pressure, and Trump was openly signaling impatience. But now, that moment appears to have passed, at least for now. The odds of a US strike on Iran in the next 7 days have dropped to around 30%. Not because tensions are resolved, but because the conditions that would justify immediate action have changed. Here's what actually happened, and why this pause should not be mistaken for de-escalation. The most important shift is on the ground inside Iran. The wave of domestic protests that initially raised the stakes has largely subsided. Following a brutal crackdown, one that reportedly left over 2,000 people dead, protest activity has diminished sharply. From the White House's perspective, this matters. The original justification for potential military action was tied to deterrence and signaling support for protesters. Trump publicly noted this as a positive development, a small but useful pretext to step back from immediate action. The second reason is more structural. Despite intense pressure, Iran's regime is not on the verge of collapse. Security forces have remained loyal. There are no visible fractures in the leadership, and the state has shown a willingness to use overwhelming force to retain control. From Washington's point of view, this raises a critical question. Would US strikes meaningfully change the political situation inside Iran? Right now, the answer appears to be no, and launching military action without a plausible path to regime destabilization carries high risk with uncertain payoff. Third, the US military posture in the region was not yet optimal. The United States has more than enough capability to strike Iran, but its regional bases are vulnerable to retaliation, particularly missile and drone attacks. Iran has made clear that any US strike would not go unanswered. To manage that risk, Washington is moving an aircraft carrier strike group into the region and considering additional air and naval deployments. But that takes time. It will be at least another week before those assets are fully in place, and until then, the costs of escalation outweigh the benefits. The fourth factor is regional politics. Gulf Arab states quietly urged Washington to hold off on kinetic action, warning that Iranian retaliation could disrupt oil flows and regional stability. Turkey has also expressed skepticism that military pressure would lead to regime change in Tehran. Crucially, Iran warned both Gulf states and Turkey that US bases on their territory would be legitimate targets in a retaliatory strike. That message landed. This pause, however, is temporary. Once the US carrier group arrives, likely in late January or early February, the calculus changes. With more assets in place, Washington will be better positioned to strike and absorb retaliation. At that point, the probability of US strikes rises to roughly 65% and remains elevated through at least the first half of 2026. In other words, the delay is about timing and leverage, not restraint. The White House is likely to use this window to push Iran toward negotiations, but on maximalist terms. These demands would include giving up uranium enrichment, pulling back from regional proxy groups, and restricting missile development. Iran is extremely unlikely to accept these conditions. And when diplomacy fails, that failure itself becomes justification for escalation. There's also a domestic wildcard. Iran has not resolved the root causes of unrest. Protests could flare up again, potentially soon. A key date is mid-February, when the 40-day mourning period for those killed in the crackdown ends. Funeral marches could trigger a renewed protest wave and another violent response by the regime. That scenario would once again give Washington a moral and political pretext to threaten military action. So this isn't de-escalation. It's a pause. The strike option is delayed, not abandoned, and the underlying dynamics continue to point toward confrontation rather than resolution. If you want to understand geopolitical risk, this is one to keep watching.